My husband is craving breakfast because he wants me to make these biscuits. I made these biscuits last week when my family was here and we all loved them. This is a version of Hardee's biscuits and my husband says they taste just like Hardee's biscuits, and I have to admit they did. Other than the fact that I didn't smother them in butter. If you've ever had a Hardee's biscuit, then you know how they're smothered in butter. Before I get started, I did want to show you my dough bowl. I think I may have shown some of you this in some of my earlier videos, but this dough bowl my husband purchased at an auction for me. I wasn't with him and it was a gift and I just love it. This is an old handmade dough bowl. It's got grooves in it where they would lay their rolling pin across it. And if you've ever watched Brenda Gant make biscuits, that's how they made the biscuits. They would keep their flour in here and then they would keep it covered and then just come back and make that well and make biscuits. And I guess they kept their rolling pin across the top. Or the grooves may have even been cut out originally. I don't know. But I just love it, and what I keep in here is my collection of rolling pins. Enough talking about my dough bowl. Let's go ahead and get started on these biscuits. If you want to follow along with me, we're going to preheat our oven to 425 degrees. And I am using a 10-inch cast iron skillet. You can use whatever pan you would like, but if you want your biscuits to rise high, you're going to use something with sides on it. Some of you may not agree with that, and that's okay. To each his own. Okay, you want to start out, of course, with clean hands. I think we all know that. And then we are going to add 2 cups of flour. This is self-rising flour, and I only use White Lily. You can use whatever flour you'd like, but just make sure it's self-rising. Now we're going to add 1 stick of butter. And instead of cutting that butter into the flour by hand, I am just going to use my grater. Once you've finished grating the butter, the whole entire stick of butter into your flour, we are going to use some buttermilk. For this particular biscuit recipe, you're going to want to use buttermilk. Shake it real good. You'll always want to shake your buttermilk because the fat separates and you want to shake it really good. So I'm adding 1 1/3 cup of buttermilk. Add 1 teaspoon of baking powder. Add 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Go ahead and mix this up. And I'm just kind of moving it around. You don't want to mash that butter and you soften it because that butter's cold. And the more you stir, the softer that butter's going to get. So just make sure you blend it really well. And then you're going to take an area. You may use your countertop. You might even use a mat, but I like to use my tray. And I've told you guys this before, but my new viewers may not know this. And I have this tray I like to use, and I use my great-grandmother's rolling pin. Put some flour down on your area, your surface. Make sure your hands are really coated in the flour as well, because with this particular biscuit recipe, these were very gooey. And they kept trying to stick to my hands. And the first time I made them, I really questioned as to how good these biscuits were really going to be. But just keep working this dough. I flatten it out and fold it. And then throw a little more flour on it, flatten it out, and fold it. Now this is just how I work my biscuits most of the time. But this particular recipe is very sticky. So I kept doing this, and I believe I repeated this process about 5 times until my dough, I was able to pick it up without it wanting to fall apart. And it felt just a little bit firmer. So about 5 times of doing this, maybe 6. And then we're going to roll this out, and you are going to lightly press on this. Cut these about 1 inch to 1.5 inches thick. You want them at least 1 inch thick. You can see how thick mine are. And then once you've got that done, we're just gonna start cutting those biscuits out. You'll see me tossing these in my hand, and that's just to get the excess flour off of them. And this works great. This is a recipe that I found in one of my old cookbooks, and it said Hardee's Biscuits. And guys, this is about as close as I've made to Hardee's Biscuit. I've tried every recipe anyone's ever given me that I've seen just about, because I'm just kind of a biscuit connoisseur. And I don't like just one plain solid type of biscuit. I like all biscuits. And I'm sure some of you are some great biscuit makers out there, but there are some of you that, you know, I've read posts that kind of struggle with it, but anybody can do this. It just takes a little practice. Of course, it's easy for some of us to say because we've been doing this all our lives, and I have been making biscuits just about the majority of my life. Okay, I squirreled on you, didn't I? Well, back to the biscuits. This biscuit recipe has a lot of fat in it, more so than the biscuits that I make on a normal basis when I'm not trying out some other recipe. And so when I went to pat these up and put them in my cast iron skillet, it made more than normal. That's because it has so much fat. And so I had to pat out 2 more biscuits to put in a tiny little baby skillet I have. Now in the oven they go. Okay guys, fresh out of the oven, I let these bake for 17 minutes on 425, and then I checked on them and they were starting to brown. At that point, you do want to keep an eye on them. They'll start to brown. Depends on how brown you want the tops. And I do keep a stick of butter in my refrigerator just for this purpose, because I'm a Southern girl and I make biscuits at least once a week. And I will just take that butter and just go ahead and just rub it on top. Oh, these are so good.